I'm going to take you on a journey through some of the most magnificent scenery to be found anywhere on Earth. The landscape of the British Isles. We'll see great lakes and lochs, climb rocky peaks and mountains, and travel through gentle landscapes too, rolling hills and downland, corners of the country like a garden in flower. I'll sail round dramatic stretches of our coastline, where white cliffs rise like a fortress from the sea. Our love of this countryside seems natural to us. Yet it's only in the last 300 years that we've learnt to appreciate the beauty of our own landscape. It took a group of pioneering artists to open our eyes to the splendor of our islands. It was here in the north of England that artists and writers first began to explore the wilder parts of Britain and to see beauty where before people had only seen savagery. So this is the landscape that changed our view of the world. This is the romantic north, where the art of British landscape was born. The north of England, the scenery that inspired a revolution in the way we think and feel about British landscape. It's not difficult to see why. I'm following in the footsteps of some of our greatest writers and painters to the place where our love of the British landscape began. I'm heading for the Lake District. The Lake District is just a small corner of England, but it contains some of the most spectacular scenery in the country. Artists and poets have produced their greatest work here, celebrating the landscape. First time I came to the lakes, I was 17. I came with my brother, and we were making a holiday film.
We're off on a holiday journey.
We went all over the place. We went sort of walking around the hills. We went water skiing. We went to see the snuff factory at Kendal. We went on a steam train. We ate our high teas at 6:30. It's a long time ago, and the extraordinary thing is it really hasn't changed very much. What has changed, and it's quite extraordinary, is the way we spoke.
Jonathan, who's much lighter than me and perhaps a little bit more agile, went up like a cat, but my progress wasn't quite so fast.
I mean, I can't believe it's the same person talking. Jonathan went up the rocks like a cat. And the hat, I mean, is that really me? Anyway, that was 50 years ago, and this is now. And what's magical is that this is the same landscape that they saw 300 years ago, and you can see it now in the 21st century. It's just beautiful. But the Lake District didn't always inspire people. Nearly 300 years ago, it was a place to avoid. When the author of Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe, came here in the 1720s, he made it absolutely clear that this was the last place on earth he wanted to be. He said it was the wildest, most terrible and frightful of any of the places he'd passed. He said that the pleasant part of England was at an end. Defoe's opinion wasn't unusual for the time. The countryside was a hostile place. Bad roads meant accidents were common. Stagecoach travellers were prey to highwaymen. And if you didn't get robbed at gunpoint, there were bogs and marshes to drown you. Britain was still a land of superstition and folklore. The countryside was haunted by evil spirits, by goblins, by witches. But that vision was about to change with the dawn of a new era. The revolution was started by one man. He was a local clergyman called Dr. John Brown, and he saw things in a new light. He wrote a letter about it in 1752. He saw this wilderness as something wonderful, albeit something with an element of danger. The perfection of Keswick, he said, rests on three circumstances: beauty, horror, and immensity. Nobody had talked about the countryside like this before, but travellers back from grand tours of the continent were excited by its dramatic scenery and by the painters who captured it. They began looking for the same excitement at home. It was the birth of the picturesque. Brown was rapturous. The lakes were immense amphitheatres surrounded by lofty mountains piercing the clouds. Waterfalls never just trickled, they tumbled in vast sheets from rock to rock in rude and terrible magnificence. Clouds were gloomy and great, and rocks and cliffs were of stupendous height. Immense and awful is how Brown described this view, but he tended to lay it on with a trowel. I mean, rude, terrible, horrible grandeur. He talked about the gloomy greatness of this part of the lakes. What he was trying to do was change the way people saw the landscape. They'd thought it was too wild, too frightful to look at. He was saying, actually, it can be really exciting, and all the more exciting, perhaps, because there's just a whiff of danger. Writers and artists were soon exploring the lakes, pioneers in frontier territory. They were compared to big game hunters tracking down wild and savage scenes to hang like trophies on their walls. Their paintings were enough to whet the appetite of wealthy tourists. And it wasn't long before they too began to develop a taste for wilderness. By the 1780s, the Lake District was the most fashionable tourist destination in Britain. He prefers ice cream. The locals cashed in. Hotels, inns, boat hire businesses were set up to cater for the growing number of visitors.
Hello, afternoon to you all. Are you ready for a nice afternoon's trip out? Then come and get on board. Let's go.
Thank you.
Many offered themselves as guides to tourists who were fearful of exploring the lakes alone.
Okay, let's get on. Let's go and have a tour of the lakes.
Even then, there were traffic jams as carriages clogged the roads to the main sites.
Hello, welcome to you all. Welcome to the afternoon tour. My name is Steve. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're going to have a short trip around the Southern Lakes area this afternoon. Basically, we are a national park made up of 900 square miles. We have a population of just over 41,000 people. Then during the course of a normal season, that is swelled by up to 15 million tourists.
The first tourists were a very demanding lot. They were rich, they were adventurous, they were seeking thrills. They were the kind of people who would have gone on a grand tour of Europe. But with all the turbulence on the continent, they were forced to stay here at home. But they didn't just want to go on an ordinary journey. They wanted to see the very best sights, and particularly places where they could do landscape painting. And Thomas West came to their rescue. Thomas West wrote this, the very first guidebook to the lakes, and it soon became a bestseller, so that everybody traveling here would carry this book with them. West gave clear instructions to the exact vantage points from which to paint the best views. He called each stopping point a station and chose 21 perfect spots around the four main lakes. Tourists have been flocking here since 1778. This was the first station recommended by West on Derwentwater. He describes it as an elegant sheet of water spread out before you, shining like a mirror and transparent as crystal. And he says that on a fine day, the sun plays upon the bosom of the lake, and the surrounding mountains are illuminated by its refulgent rays. Magnificent.
Beautiful evening. It's absolutely magnificent, isn't it? Marvellous.
Dreamy, it's just beautiful, isn't it? Ethereal.
But it brings out the poet in you being
Oh,
here.
it definitely, yes, yeah.
Today, people take photographs. In the 18th century, West's book sparked a frenzy of amateur painting, while professional artists cashed in on a growing demand for souvenir prints. And once they're tired of one view, they'd dash off to the next station to see what else West had in store. We're told to observe two huge fragments of ferruginous-coloured rock, which I think are these, with this iron in the rock. That's the ferruginous bit. Now, from here, West says, all that is great and pleasing on the lake, all that is grand and sublime in the environs lie before you in a beautiful order and natural disposition. The most painted of stations was the monumental Bowder Stone, a 2,000-ton boulder which West describes as a mountain in itself. But packing a copy of West's guide in your trunk wasn't enough. To capture the full glory of the landscape, you had to have the right equipment. Any self-respecting amateur artist would come laden with an array of paraphernalia. Whoa, I'll put this on here. You've got an awful lot of clobber here.
Well, this is the sort of stuff that a tourist in the 18th century or amateur artist would probably bring along to help him appreciate the landscape.
Telescope.
Yes.
Does it work?
To enjoy the view.
What's this?
That's a collection of brushes, pencils.
Lovely.
An early map of Derwentwater.
Looks like where the buried treasure is, doesn't it? Your drawing book.
That is an old watercolour box.
And this one, what's this? This is beautiful.
It is, isn't it? It is a pedometer. It attaches to the belt and the other end to the boot. And so at the end of the day, they knew how many miles they'd walked.
Oh, brilliant.
Nothing left to chance.
And what's this last one?
Well, that is the Claude glass. And this is one of a different shape.
The Claude glass, named after the French landscape painter Claude Lorrain, was a device to frame the landscape like a camera viewfinder, so that the painter wasn't overwhelmed by its vastness.
You hold it up and look over your shoulder.
It's such a funny idea, though, isn't it? Coming to a great landscape and then turning your back on it and looking at it this way round. But I do see the point of it. It's a way of sort of taking charge of the landscape,
right.
isn't it?
And also probably taming the landscape within that frame as well.
What you see is a sort of enhanced version, clearer version of the landscape.
Very precise, as if you're looking at a romantic image.
Can I see that one?
This, of course, you get a much smaller image, but a rather nice oval landscape.
Yes. That's great. We should start making them again, because it's a good way of seeing.
It is. Then there's another way of looking at the landscape. Tinted lenses.
Yes. And this was another tourist
Gimmick, thing.
Really, wasn't
so
it?
you could have autumn, winter, evening, dawn, all in the one sort of 10 minutes.
You have to hold it very close to see. Ah, now. That is like a sort of violent sunset, deep, deep red sunset. Very eerie looking. This one is like sort of serene summer day. Everything's gone golden yellow. Lovely. That would make me feel, time for picnic or lunch. And this one, this is really strange. This is like moonlight, isn't it? It's all gone cold. All the colour's gone out except the blues. It's interesting. It's rather strange using charcoal. It forces me to be bolder.
Absolutely. But that's good, isn't it?
My instinct is to do tiny,
Can
tiny
I move
little...
and have a look or not? Is that allowed?
Yes, you can. My instinct is to do tiny little drawings, you see.
Actually, that's nice. That's nice. That's...
Shush, shut your mouth.
Okay.
Leave me to it. Sometimes just painting views wasn't enough. Artists wanted to experience the landscape in other ways. In the late 18th century, fleets of boats were ready to take travellers on excursions round the lake, deepening their understanding of the landscape and its subtlety. And once that taste was satisfied, they faced a quite different assault on their senses. The boat was manoeuvred to a particular spot on the lake where valleys led off in all directions. Oops. Yes. The tourists would line up on the deck where cannon were positioned. Up to 12 cannon on one particular boat. And this is what they were waiting for. One, two, three. Great! Great! There are meant to be 6 or 7 echoes as that bang reverberates up and down the valley. The trouble is there's a bit of wind today. I think it's not working quite as well as it might. It's also raining a bit, which can't help. But when it really works well, apparently it sounds as though these mountains are crumbling and the whole place is falling into the lake. And these travellers would come here just to hear that sound, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. until the final bang was as loud as the very first bang. I can only hear an aeroplane. 1, 2, 3. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going deaf. Capturing the drama of the scene was a challenge for the artist. But a painter named William Gilpin had a solution. Gilpin published a set of rules for those who wanted to create a truly picturesque painting. They were like the 10 Commandments for the fashionable artists of the day. The picturesque scene should include a distant, craggy mountain. Smooth, rounded hills are out. The foreground had to be filled with trees, waterfalls, and rocks. But not any old rocks, you understand. They have to be rugged, not smooth, and grey, not red, so they contrast with the greenery. Even animals don't escape his unforgiving eye. He admits that horses are nobler than cows, but says from the picturesque point of view, the cow is superior, because the horse is all soft and nice curves, whereas the cow is angular and much better suited to drawing with a pencil. The only thing to remember about cows is they're so large you don't want too many of them in your foreground. Ideally just 3, either in a group or 2 and then 1 slightly to one side. The sheep is just as beautiful as the cow and as well adapted to painting as long as it hasn't been shorn. Gilpin's rules sound a bit obsessive, but they were followed, even by professional artists. When the painter Philippe de Lauderberg visited the Lake District, it looked as though he had Gilpin's book in one hand and his paintbrush in the other. His painting of Ullswater has all the right ingredients. Textured rocks, a lake, a romantic ruin in the middle distance, and of course, those nicely ordered cattle. Gilpin was an irresistible target to those who thought picturesque tours were becoming a bit ridiculous. Thomas Rowlandson, the most outrageous cartoonist of the day, mocked Gilpin mercilessly. Helvellyn, one of the highest and most treacherous mountains in Britain. At over 3,000 feet, it can be a challenging climb. In 1805, a 21-year-old aspiring artist called Charles Gough set off with his dog to scale the mountain. He was never seen alive again. "200 years after he disappeared, I'm on the trail of Gough. I'm in good hands. My guide climbs Helvellyn every day, whatever the weather, to gauge if it's safe for others to follow. "200 years ago, they talked about this landscape all full of discussion about the horrors and the terrors of the mountains and all that. Were they exaggerating, or is it a dangerous place?
It's a matter of opinion. I think it's beautiful. I love it.
But what kinds of things happen to people? I mean, do people get killed there?
Yeah, the last 3 years, 3 people have fallen on Helvellyn to their deaths.
That's where we're going?
That's where we're going.
Cool. I suppose it's worth it.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, it feels quite cool up here. What readings do you take?
The air temperature I'm getting at the moment is minus 2.5 degrees centigrade, but the temperature you feel on the skin, that's actually the important one, because that's the one that gets you.
Minus 13, 14.
Yeah.
So as the wind picks up,
Yeah,
so
the
the
stronger the
temperature
wind.
drops on
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, minus 12.
What's the coldest you could get up here?
The coldest I've had with the wind chill was minus 32 degrees.
Really?
That was cold.
And
that was very cold.
Yeah. It's believed Charles Goff tried to reach the summit of Helvellyn by climbing a precarious ridge called Striding Edge. The path is narrow and dangerous, with drops on either side. People still get into trouble up here, and it's here that Goff's trail goes cold.
Look at this, it's real natural beauty.
Can't see anything.
Yes, you can. It's frozen tarn,
yes.
snow. It's as natural as we get in England, and it's really untamed on a day like today.
You certainly feel that nature predominates here, not man.
Absolutely. Nature tolerates us in a place like this. It's not a question of being conquered by man or anything. Nature lets you in on her terms.
I hope she lets us out.
I would say so.
Hello, little dog. Charles Goff wasn't so lucky. 3 months after he disappeared, a shepherd found his body at the edge of a lake called Red Tarn. He'd fallen to his death from Striding Edge. Goff's belongings, a sketchbook, a pencil, and a clawed glass, suggested he died in search of the perfect view. There was one mystery about Goff's death. When his body was found, the bones were scattered all around, whitened and with no flesh on them. And beside him, keeping guard, was his dog. Now, some people said the dog had been there faithful all those weeks, just looking after his master's dead body. But others pointed out that the dog was suspiciously fat. Goff became a martyr to landscape art. His death inspired an ever-growing band of romantic poets and painters. Queen Victoria's favourite painter, Sir Edwin Landseer, imagined the scene. Poor Goff, frozen forever, the romantic victim rather than the famous artist he had aspired to be. One summer evening in the 1780s, a boy was walking by a lake in Patterdale. He discovered a boat, a small skiff, tied to a willow tree. On an impulse, he stole the boat and rowed out onto the moonlit lake. The boy was William Wordsworth, and he was about to experience something that he said helped forge his destiny as a poet. While he was rowing, a strange thing happened to him. A rocky cliff appeared above the horizon, a great outcrop of stone. And he looked up at it, and as he started to row away from it, it suddenly seemed to him to be coming alive, to be getting closer to him, to be chasing him like some animate object. He rowed faster and faster, and the faster he rowed, the more it seemed to be chasing him, until, in terror and his hands shaking, he turned his boat and slipped quietly away, back to where he'd stolen it from. The experience had a profound effect on the young Wordsworth. It constantly came into his dreams. What had happened was he'd seen nature suddenly at its most powerful, its most awe-inspiring, and realized how pitifully small man was by comparison. What happened on that moonlit lake affected his entire life's work. As an adult, Wordsworth settled in Grasmere with his sister Dorothy, living in Dove Cottage. Here he became passionate about the natural world, from the greatest mountain to the smallest flower. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Wordsworth wrote his most famous poem after a walk with Dorothy round the banks of Ullswater, one April afternoon in 1802. As they set off home, they were uplifted by the sight of these yellow flowers swaying in the wind. When the poem was published, some of his admirers were dismayed, even disgusted, at what they saw as his self-indulgence. They couldn't believe that someone with such a magical command of words could squander them on something so paltry, so commonplace as daffodils. What perhaps they hadn't understood was that at the heart of the romantic idea was the notion that any experience, whether great or small, could spark the imagination.
We get an awful lot of people here coming now, and of course they all want to come and see where the daffodils were. People sit there and somebody recites the poem to them, which I find a little strange, but everybody to their own.
So the daffodils are trampled half to death, are they, every summer?
Well, yes, we do get
spring.
We do get that problem with people trampling on them. We do get things like people come and want to pick them. Don't mind that so much, but the ones who come and want to dig them up and take them home so they can have their little clump of Wordsworth daffs in their garden do annoy us a little bit.
What is it about the daffodil that's so special?
I don't know really. It's because it's a little fighter, I think. It's a little yellow flower that pops out every spring. I wouldn't say it's a rare flower in England, but there's not a lot of places where it's still growing like this, where it's grown for, well, we know for at least 200 years on this side.
High on the fells, the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge had a very different experience of the lakes.
Unlike his friend Wordsworth, who found happiness here, Coleridge was descending into a kind of private hell. He'd long been an opium addict, and up here he found a new drug called Kendal Black Drop, a mixture of brandy and opium far stronger than anything he'd had before. It gave him such appalling nightmares that he was actually afraid to go to sleep.
Hence viper thoughts that coil around my mind, reality's dark dream. I turn from you and listen to the wind which long has raved unnoticed. What a scream of agony by torture lengthened out that lute sent forth. Thou wind that ravest without, bare crag or mountain tarn or blasted tree, or pine grove with a woodman never clomb, or lonely house long held the witch's home, methinks were fitter instruments for thee.
Coleridge simply abandoned himself to the lakes, to the fiercest crags of these mountains, to the fiercest weather. He walked, he climbed, and he suffered. He described how his hands would end up bleeding, how his eyes went red with the fierceness of the wind, how he suffered boils, how he got terrible pains in his legs. The idea behind it all was just to expose himself to the worst that the elements could do, in the hope of a kind of salvation, I suppose.
We're leaving behind the wild, rugged terrain of the Lake District. I'm travelling cross-country, heading towards Northumberland. For me, this ancient land, buffeted by the North Sea gales, is one of the most exciting coastlines in Britain. The island of Lindisfarne. It's joined to the mainland by a narrow causeway. Twice a day it's cut off as tides sweep across these mudflats. Over the centuries, foolhardy travellers have drowned here. In the 1790s, two young artists came here in search of inspiration. One would live to enjoy fame and fortune, while the other would die young and be forgotten. Together, their genius would change the face of British landscape painting forever. Their names, William Turner and Thomas Girtin. Girtin was the first to come here. It was 1796. He was 21 years old. He'd just finished an apprenticeship in London. Girtin had been tutored in the strict artistic rules of the day. Stifled by convention, he travelled north to find freedom and fresh inspiration in the wild scenery of Northumberland.
Girtin was a rebel, a natural breaker of rules. He thought that the traditional teaching on how you should draw and paint was cold and unfeeling. He didn't want to draw every precise little detail of what he saw. Instead, he wanted to give an impression of how he felt about the landscape. And so, he insisted on painting in the open air, in a vantage point here, and worked obsessively until he'd captured the mood of this place.
Girtin's epic painting shows man dwarfed by the immensity of the landscape. He's not attempting a precise reproduction of the scene before him, but a vision of it, shaped by his own feelings. He's exaggerated the height of the rocky outcrop. Detail is abandoned for loose, dramatic brushstrokes. When it was exhibited, some people said his style was lazy, even that it was unfinished. But others said Girtin burst like a meteor upon the public. Within weeks of seeing Girtin's painting, William Turner set off for Lindisfarne, determined to outdo his friend and rival. It would be the first of many trips north. In this wild landscape, Turner gave full rein to his emotions. A storm is brewing. Dark clouds threaten to envelop the sunlit scene. The turbulent North Sea swells and crashes, battering the island. In the foreground, travellers struggle ashore. Again, nature towers over mankind. Girtin and Turner came to define the golden age of landscape art. But while Turner's career brought him fame and fortune, Girtin's was tragically cut short. Painting outside in all weathers, he succumbed to asthma and died just 27 years old. But in his short life, Girtin painted some of the most powerful pictures of the North. An inspiration to other painters, even if forgotten by the world.
I was a teenager when I first saw a Thomas Girtin watercolour. It was for sale for a fraction of what it'd be worth today because he wasn't particularly fashionable. I rather wish I'd bought it. But Girtin seems to have fallen through the net of history, and yet when he died, many people ranked him above Turner. Turner himself, at the peak of his fame, said, "If Tom Girtin had lived, I should have starved." I'm heading into Yorkshire, what the Yorkshire people call God's own country. And as far as I know, the only county that claims its own national anthem on Ilkley Moor, Bartat.
According to tradition, the song was conceived here at the Cow and Calf Rocks on Ilkley Moor. If this is Yorkshire's national anthem, then brass bands are Yorkshire's national music.
I never understood what it means. This bloke on the moors without his hat on. Doesn't seem to make much of a song. Is there something about the landscape of Yorkshire and the look of Yorkshire, do you think, that affects the people who live here and the music you play?
Perhaps the weather. It's quite cold. It's certainly cold up here today, and we haven't got hats on, as you've noticed.
I think it must have because there's such a variety of countryside in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
From the plains of York being flat to the moors over beside, or if you get, like here, around here, the Pennines, you're on the backbone of England. And if you live and are born and bred in the backbone of England, the backbone of anything is the main part, isn't it?
Yes.
Hard?
Yes, I would say it's hard because of the industries that people have to work in: stone quarry and coal mining, textiles. I always think that it's perhaps northern men are reluctant to show their emotions. And I think all your emotions can come out in your music, and you can continue to be, not soft, but a Yorkshireman.
What is it to be a Yorkshireman?
What is it to be a Yorkshireman? Well, to be born in God's own county, there's nothing better, is there? You can't claim to be a Yorkshireman, can you?
I'm from East Sheen.
Exactly.
West London. is where I was
Exactly.
born.
That's not God's county, is it?
It is to me. I'm walking along the Craven Fault, a 22-mile geological gash in the landscape, which runs from the borders of Cumbria into the Yorkshire Dales. At the northern end of this great limestone gorge is one of the most spectacular sights in Britain. Wow. This is the famous Goredale Scar. Somewhere around 50, maybe 60 million years old. Used to have a great roof to it, so now these are like the walls of a crumbling building, but on a massive scale, over 300 feet or something like that, water plunging down the middle. It used to make people think, when they stood here where I'm standing, that the sides were going to fall down any moment, collapse on top of them. People came here wanting to be awestruck, to experience a landscape that had the power to inspire terror. The poet Thomas Gray said he could only bear to stay here for a quarter of an hour, and even then, not without shuddering. You'd think this place would be an absolute gift to the artist. These great, overpowering rocks, the whole scale of it. But the funny thing is, they all thought it was unpaintable, almost too majestic to be compressed into a canvas, until one person proved them wrong. His name was James Ward, and in 1812 he transformed the unpaintable into a triumph of landscape art. Ward captured the sight that so terrified his fellow painters in a monumental picture, 12 feet high, 14 feet wide. Ward rearranged elements of Goredale Scar to provoke the strongest emotional response. Beneath a sky turbulent with storm clouds, he increased its scale, deepening and darkening the chasm. He moved the waterfall into the center to provide a glimmer of light in the darkness, and added a herd of cows and deer emerging from the depths of the cavern, dominated by a great white bull in the foreground. painting proved overwhelming in more ways than one. Ward's masterpiece was too large to hang in the home of Lord Ribblesdale, his patron. It ended up in the British Museum, and they couldn't find anywhere to put it either. And so for nearly 30 years, it was rolled up and left in a dank cellar.
To Ward's fury, the picture wasn't exhibited in his lifetime. It was 20 years after his death before it was finally hung on the walls of the National Gallery. The problem with landscape that could thrill and terrify the tourist was that it took such an effort to get to. There were a growing number of visitors in the early 1800s who wanted something a little less strenuous. Many of them found their way to the town of Knaresborough, in the gorge of the River Nid.
A trip to Knaresborough was a package tour of the picturesque. All that fashionable fell walking and crag climbing was dirty and wet and cold and possibly dangerous. But if you wanted to experience the excitement of the romantic vision, then you could come here. You could say this is where the unruly spirit of romanticism was tamed.
Knaresborough was the romantic north in miniature. It had all the picturesque favourites: a tumbling weir, a river shaded by trees, a craggy gorge, the ruins of an ancient castle. And it even had a cave reputed once to have been home to a local witch.
Well, not that was so bad.
In the 19th century, Knaresborough was a romantic theme park, perfect for those who preferred their nature a little less savage. The biggest lure was the dropping well, where as though by magic, everyday objects would be turned to stone.
So what's actually happening? It's just water dripping down on them.
That's
And
right.
it turns them to stone.
It's the mineral content of the water.
Really? And they're really hard when they're finished, though.
They are very hard, yeah.
But it's not just teddy bears, you've got a baseball glove.
A glove,
handbag.
a handbag. That
Whose
was
then?
Agatha Christie's handbag.
No.
It
Go on.
was, yeah.
Go on with you.
It was.
Was it?
Truly, truly. So they used to walk to the top of the well and hang things over. And in 1853, it was a couple on the way to York races. And they hung a top hat and a lady's bonnet. And they never collected them, never came back for them, and they're still there now.
They're enormous, that one. It's
It
vast.
is, yes it is.
And that's meant to be a top hat.
That's a top hat, and the one on the right is the bonnet, the lady's bonnet.
But they've been there 130 years or so.
I'll take your word for that, yeah.
Something like that. I can't do the maths either. I've got a glove. I lost the other one. So
Okay.
I've got one glove, which I can sacrifice to the
Right,
well.
okay. Nice one.
There we are. Seems safe. Come back in 6 months.
Heading southwest, I'm entering Bronte country.
Through the snowy waste, across the blasted heath, one. Ah! He drove his car. I love it on top of the moors. You feel more free, I think, on these hills than in real mountains, which are always sort of lowering over you. Here, you really are on top of the world. It makes your spirit soar.
I wish I were out of doors, half savage and hardy and free, and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. I'm sure I should be myself were I once among the heather on those hills. Emily Bronte's story of the tragic love affair between Catherine Earnshaw and the brooding hero Heathcliff would change the way we feel about the Yorkshire moors forever. This great outcrop of rock is known in Wuthering Heights as Penistone Crag. It's the secret meeting place of Cathy and Heathcliff. And this is the Fairy Cave. Legend has it that if you crawl through here, you'll be married within a year. Well, I'm already married, and luckily, I don't think I could get through it if I tried. Wuthering Heights shocked Victorian readers with its violent and passionate portrayal of love. Yet Emily Bronte was a shy young woman who led a sheltered life and never married. Like all the artists and writers who opened our eyes to the wild beauty of the North, she found a special kind of freedom in this landscape. It must have been wandering on these moors that inspired Emily's imagination, led to that passionate and emotional writing. Her elder sister Charlotte understood it. She wrote once that Emily loved the moors. Out of a sullen hollow on a livid hillside, she said, Emily could make an Eden.